Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Kalika and you're gonna be an extremely spicier person after watching this video. Evil stepfather gets what he deserves. TLDR at the bottom. I made a comment on another post, got way more upvotes and comments than expected, and Alex and Drake suggested I tell a more in-depth version of the story here. When I was 15, my mum started dating a man she met on a dating website. I didn't like him the first time I met him, and 2 months later he moved into the house. About 3 weeks after he moved in, he took my skateboards, self-built halfpipe, ramps, BMX bike, ice hockey gear, and many other things to the dump one day while I was at school. He said he did this because he didn't want all of my crap cluttering up his garage. Maybe 2 months later, he punched me in the stomach for the first time because I got up from the dinner table without asking to be excused. From there, it escalated into full-fledged beatdowns for the smallest perceived slight to his authority. One day, he decided to take my extensive Pokemon card collection, even more extensive comic book collection, my Game Boy and PS2 with all the assorted games, and my fantasy and sci-fi book collection and got rid of it all because 15-year-old boys should be playing football and baseball, not being a nerd playing with Pokemon cards and reading comics and books. I would like to add that he was a middle school teacher and in his off time refereed and umpired local middle and high school sports games. My mum never intervened, and in fact acquiesced when he demanded that she stop giving me lunch money, because the little jerk will just spend it on comics and other gay stuff. One day, I took maybe $3 and change out of his change jar so that I could buy a slice of pizza and some fruit punch during lunch at school, because I was tired of being hungry. My twin sister was always a bit of an a-hole and frequently blackmailing me into doing her chores from a young age. I was fed up and refused to do something, so she told him what I had done. This man actually called the police and pressed a larceny charge against me, and once the police had left, proceeded to beat me senseless. At that point, I ran away. When the cops found me and returned me to my home, I found out that he'd been trying to talk my mum into sending me away to military school or something of that nature. I ran away again, and between having run away several times and the larceny charge, ended up turning 16 in juvenile detention. I spent the next couple of years miserable and afraid, frequently contemplating suicide. Once I was out on my own, I didn't speak to my mum for several years. We eventually reconciled, and by that point, they had married. I was a lot bigger than I had been as a young teenager, and I'd gotten into weightlifting, so he no longer acted like he was going to punch me to make me flinch, much less actually hit me, and we basically avoided each other for the most part. My mother found out that she had stage 4 cancer, and no longer wanted to waste any of the time she had left with him, so she had a lawyer draft up a separation agreement, whereby he would receive a set amount of money upon separation, and would have 45 days to retrieve his belongings from the house. He had spent his entire inheritance in 6 months and then had to sell his mother's house that he grew up in order to settle his debts shortly before they started dating. And my mother brought the house back from the bank before they married. She allowed him to keep the house and he moved back into his mother's house. My mother passed away about 9 months after their separation, and despite the agreement had been allowing him to come and get his stuff piecemeal, I put an immediate end to that. He was past the deadline to remove his personal effects, and they were now legally mine to dispose of as I saw fit. I sold his baseball card collection, around $14,000, and his autographed sports memorabilia, roughly $11,000. Also sold all of his woodworking equipment, along with several finished pieces of furniture that he had made, $6,500 I think. I kept his mother's engagement ring, platinum band, 3 diamonds roughly 2 carats, wedding band, his coin collection, I also collect coins, and some tools and other odds and ends. Now comes the real fun. Around a month ago, I finally saw him at the grocery store. As he was leaving, I approached him. I told him I had sold his collection as he was pushing his cart out towards his car. He reacted exactly as I expected. He took a swing at me multiple times. I already had my phone ready to dial 911. Several of these punches missed, and the ones that did connect didn't have much effect because he's nowhere near as strong as he was 20 years ago in his 40s, and I no longer a skinny little 15-year-old. He continued to try and punch me as I spoke to the 911 operator, and was actively ramming his grocery cart into my new Toyota as the police officers pulled into the parking lot. He was arrested for assault, communicating threats, and destruction of property. As a result, he lost his job and pension at the local middle school, and because he'd never learned how to save money while married to my somewhat wealthy mother, ended up having to sell his mother's house because he hired an expensive lawyer thinking he could somehow beat the charges. My nephew, who was on the football team, made it well known to his friends that he not only had just been arrested and convicted of assault as well as other charges, but he had also beat me as a child, causing several parents to call for him to resign from refereeing and umpiring for the local sports games. My niece and my girlfriend's much younger sister are enrolled at the middle school where he worked and say that he was not only universally disliked, but when he came up to the school to get his belongings, he made a big scene and ended up hysterically crying as he was leaving. At least that's what they've heard from the kids who were attending summer school at the time. His son, who he was equally abusive towards as a child, refused to take him in or help him out, so the abusive stepfather ended up having to take a job as a cashier at Walmart so he could afford the rent on his crappy little trailer in an absolutely awful neighbourhood. Even though that Walmart is not the closest Walmart to my house, that is now the only place where I go grocery shopping or to purchase anything that I need. I purposely stand in line longer than I need to, just so that he can be the one who has the pleasure of ringing up my purchases. The first time I went through his line, he attempted to ring up multiple items more than one time to overcharge me, and when I called him on it, he said that I was mistaken. I asked for a manager, and the manager believed him that it was an accident, but he learned that he can't get away with that. The second time, I made sure to be as nice as possible and had to ask for a manager because he was overwhelmingly rude. The people in line behind me backed me up and he got in some trouble for that. Every time I go in there and step into line, I see him die a little bit inside, and it gives me such satisfaction. Sometimes I'll say that I'm paying with exact change as I'm about to hand him the money, and I'll say, "Oh, I didn't realize I had that rare coin from his collection in my pocket. I guess I'll use my credit card." I just sold his expensive ratcheting wrench set, and so on Monday when he works again, I'm going to go and buy my daughter one of their better above ground pulls. And as he's ringing it out, tell him, "I know the daughter is just going to love this pull. It's not like I would have ever used those expensive ratcheting wrenches anyway." Damn, talk about absolute destruction. Completely deserved, by the way, but that's what you get for being a complete a-hole to everyone around you. How I got revenge on my cheating ex. Hello Reddit, I don't really know where this post should go, but ProRevenge seemed like a safe bet. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and please enjoy. It's a long one, but hopefully it'll be worth it. TLDR at the bottom. This story takes place almost 12 years ago, so I'll do my best with the dialogue and details, but admittedly some things are a little fuzzy. Most of my life I've had a problem with picking men that were not good for me. So much so that I even had a phrase for it, saving the world one moron at a time. One of my more spectacularly bad choices was a guy by the name of Bob. Obviously not his real name. I met Bob when I was working one of my 2 jobs at the local mall. He worked somewhere else in the mall, so we hit it off, and soon enough we were in a relationship. Within a few months, my lease was up and we ended up moving in together, which obviously in hindsight was a huge mistake, but I was dumb and lonely. Soon enough, red flags began to fly. He would say things in common conversation that were simply incorrect, like there's only 4 continents and the rest are actually owned by the Martian government, and thus don't count. And when challenged, would circular talk until you either agreed with him or dropped the subject. He would also make claims that seemed entirely unbelievable, such as when I asked where he would be staying prior to his mum's house, he camped in the woods. When I asked how he did that for months on end and without any gear, he simply gestured to himself and said, "This is all the gear I need." The worst trait though by far was his epic laziness. I have never witnessed someone so lazy in my life. Bob was unemployed for over a third of our relationship and would simply sit in the apartment watching Netflix or playing some war game on his computer, aka my spare computer, and typing away in the group chat. He would never clean up after himself, leaving dirty dishes in the sink and filth on every surface, while only taking a shower maybe once a week. The smell that permeated my apartment could only be described as revolting and could easily gag a maggot. I would inquire a few times a week at his job hunt, only to be dismissed or giving a growing amount of excuses such as, "But I don't have a car. How would I get there? The bus doesn't run in that area. The internet went down so I couldn't apply," etc, etc. Meanwhile, I'm working double and triple shifts at my job to try and keep up the lost income, and running him all over town in my off time getting applications and helping him fill them out and turn them in. Keep in mind, he doesn't have a cell phone, so all of these applications have my contact info on them. Thus begins the era of him holding my phone when I'm at work, so he can make calls or schedule interviews, as well as I can get a hold of him from my store phone if I needed to. Things began getting weird. He began staying up later and later on his group chat, sometimes till almost dawn. Sometimes we would hang out all evening until it was time for bed. Then he would always make some excuse on why he needed to check the game before bed, and he'd be right there. Hours would pass. No Bob. I began to get suspicious, but nothing incriminating seemed to be taking place, so I just shrugged it off as me being insecure. Then he started asking to use my car to go see his friend Ben. Now, I wasn't super comfortable with this, but I did know Ben pretty well and we got along almost better than Bob and I did. So I guess to a degree I trusted Ben more than Bob and agreed to it. This happened a few times while I was working the evening shift, and he was always back at the allotted time with my car and my phone and relatively grateful for the opportunity to hang with his buds. Suspicious? Yes. But I'm the kind of person that is loyal and trusting to a fault and don't assume anything without proof, and from every angle all seem to be on the up. so I took it at face value. So one day he asks to borrow my car and go with his friends to a card gaming tournament. He puts on a great show, telling me how the prize money would help us out, and with the deck he had, there was no way he could lose. I just had to let him use my car and phone this one last time, and he'd be able to buy himself a phone with the prize money. I wasn't a huge fan of the idea, but nothing untoward had occurred in the previous instances, and I didn't feel like spending my only day off at a card game convention that I literally couldn't care less about. So I acquiesced, and bought myself a couple green monsters and some vodka and had my own little personal drunk party. Hours ticked by, and no Bob. Eventually I pass out, only to wake up at the crack of dawn violently sick. This went way beyond a hangover. I start retching in the bathroom until there was nothing left but bile, but the retching wouldn't stop. Hours ticked by, and I lay on my bathroom floor sweating and convulsing with no phone, no car, and no Bob. I eventually was able to crawl to my room and wrap myself in a bathrobe before crawling down my apartment building stairs and began knocking on the closest doors. It took 3 apartments before someone opened the door and allowed me to use their phone to call my mum. My mother was at my apartment in 6 minutes flat and rushed me to the ER where I was diagnosed with an aggressive and antibiotic-resistant strain of C. diff. Bob finally showed up later that afternoon, phone and car keys in hand, looking very concerned and claiming to be deeply apologetic, but my mum hated him from that point on. I was out of the hospital and back to work within a few days, but it was the beginning of the end. During these last months, we were constantly scraping by due to his lack of consistent income and poor spending habits. There were jobs gotten and there were jobs lost for various reasons throughout our relationship, but the final job was one I helped him get literally 3 buildings down from my own workplace. This company rents furniture and electronics on a weekly or monthly basis, and I happen to know most of the employees and the hiring manager as they're regular customers at my coffee establishment. I was able to use what little sway I had to get him on there, and he accepted a job as a delivery man. Within a few weeks, I come home from work to find a brand new TV and entertainment system, and him grinning like an idiot. I tell him we can't afford this, we can barely afford to eat, and are surviving off scraps I bring home from work. He talks about his amazing employee discount and assures me it's no big deal, that the rental fee will just come out of his check. I was pissed. Not only had he not consulted me, he had also had me on the account as well. My information had been taken from the credit application I filled out as a favour to help their numbers, so if he flaked, I was liable. Fast forward another few weeks, the rent is late and we're receiving eviction notices on our door. I come home from work and the TV is mysteriously gone. Thank goodness, I think. He finally realised we can't afford it and took it back. He gets paid, rent gets paid, and all is as good as can be. Until I found a pawn slip for the TV in his pocket as I was doing laundry and went ballistic. He assured me he had plans to get it back in the works and not to worry about it. It'll be taken care of soon, and no one will be the wiser. I was too pissed to catch on to the secrecy aspect of the situation. A few more tense weeks go by with him working mornings and myself working evenings while we shared one phone and car, until that fateful day arrived. I woke up that morning with a migraine headache and opted to let Bob take the car but leave me the phone so I can call someone later on for a ride to work. A few hours of uncomfortable sleep go by before I'm awoken by my phone. I answer the phone still groggy. Hello? There's a long pause on the other end of the line until a female voice asks, is Bob there? I felt a sickening feeling in my gut and began to shake. Is this real? Am I dreaming? No, he's at work right now. This is his wife. Total lie, but hey. Is there something I can help you with? I wasn't rude, I phrased it as a genuine question rather than an accusation. Another long pause before she began to stammer about maybe she had the wrong number, but it was obvious she just wanted to get off the phone with me as quickly as possible, and I realised in that moment I desperately needed her. Please, I said with an edge of desperation in my voice. I don't know what's going on, but I just really need somebody to tell me the truth. The last word came out in a sob, and I sat there for a moment in silence trying to quell the urge to just cry uncontrollably. Listen. The voice on the other end was almost gentle. I need to make a few phone calls, but I promise you, I will call you back. She said it calmly and with so much conviction that I really wanted to believe her. Please? Promise? I almost begged. I promise, she replied. Okay. I took a deep breath and released it. I'll talk to you soon. And hung up. I then proceeded to aggressively pace my living room floor, staring at my phone while chain smoking and muttering to myself like a crazy person. I knew who she was calling. I was replaying all those little red flag moments in my head from the last few months, pinning down dates or behaviour I'd find suspect when the phone rings again. It's her. I froze for a moment. Shocked she followed through and called me back. Terrified of what this meant. I answered the phone and what followed was about the most soul-crushing 45 minutes of my life. After initial introductions, Jun, again not the real name, and I began comparing stories, and it became glaringly obvious what was happening. They had actually been in a relationship several years prior and had run back into each other on the aforementioned war game where they began to flirt on group chat. All those nights he'd been on the computer, he'd been chatting with her. All those times he'd go and hang out with his friends, he'd been using my car to take her out and my phone to communicate with her. The time I was sick and alone with no resources? You guessed it, he was with her. Oh, but it gets better. Do you have a little silver hummingbird necklace? She inquired. Yes, my mother gave it to me for my 27th birthday. I actually love it. Really? She said. 'Cause he gave me one for Mother's Day. Oh my god. I almost yelled into the phone as I ran to my room and tore through my jewellery box. It wasn't in there. It was around her neck. From there we discovered not only had he been giving her my property as gifts, but he'd had her over to our apartment passing it off as his own. I didn't want to believe him capable of doing something so cruel and disrespectful when I've allowed him to sponge off me for the better part of 3 years. Unfortunately, as in confirmation, she began describing my apartment to a T, all the way down to my bed sheets. Jun said he even pulled my secret box from beneath my bed and offered to use my adult items on her. She said she found it weird and didn't partake, but I threw them away due to the sheer ick factor. Finally, she uttered the words I didn't know I wanted to hear. You know what we should do? We should bust them together. My mind immediately started racing. Indeed we should. I was a mix of fury, adrenaline and despair, so my thinking wasn't exactly straight, and details began to get hazy here. We arranged to meet up at my work and find a way to lure Bob over there, but unfortunately she lived about 40 minutes away, whereas I only live about 6 miles from our destination, so if I got there first, I'd need to stall him, assuming he wasn't out in a delivery. I called a trusted co-worker of mine at work, sobbing and begging for a ride. To his everlasting credit, he got somebody to cover and left work to come and get me and bring me to my car. When I got to Bob's workplace, I went inside to retrieve my keys. This isn't uncommon, as they know the car is mine, and was stopped halfway through the store by Bob's manager wanting to talk about the payment due on our account. I don't remember the exact dialogue, but I said something along the lines of, "Look, I don't know when you're going to get your payment." I looked utterly defeated and told him we could never afford the TV in the first place, and how I had begged Bob to take it back, and now we don't have it anymore, as Bob had pawned it, and I don't have the money to get it out, let alone pay him. I was full on blubbering at this point when he stopped me to clarify that his employee pawned a rental TV under contract. I confirmed that this was indeed true and presented him with the pawn ticket. He was mad. Apparently such an act is illegal and has terms for immediate termination, but he assured me that if I could get the TV back to him there would be no harm, no foul, and he would terminate my contract without any penalties. I thanked him for his understanding and told him to let Bob know I'd be over at my workplace. My heart is pounding in my chest and blood is roaring in my ears. What was I gonna say? What was he gonna say? Would Jun make it here before he did? My heart sinks when I see Bob's hulking form making its way in my direction. I frantically scan the parking lot for Jun's car. She's not here yet, and I'm out of time. He hits the door looking out of breath and guilty as hell, and I just stare at him stone-faced. I walk outside silently to light a cigarette, unsure of exactly what to say, and he follows me wordlessly outside. He starts in with the, "It's not what it seems," and "It's all just a terrible misunderstanding," and I just let him dig himself deeper into his hole of lies. I listen, I nod, I pretend to understand until a particular car pulls into view. Jun parks in the space directly next to where we're standing and gets out of the car. "Hey Bob, how you doing?" Bob has gone visibly pale. He hangs his head and sits down on the curb, saying nothing to either of us. Jun and I greet each other and awkwardly shake hands before again returning our attention to Bob. Jun begins berating him on his lies and deceit, unveiling all of our mutual information and subsequent conclusions while I stood mostly in silence, agreeing at the appropriate times, but mostly still in shock. After 20 minutes of this, I finally mustered up the courage to take my stand. "We're done. I don't want to see you ever again. I'll pack up your things, only 2 boxes worth, and your sister can contact me in a few days to pick them up. Now I want your key." I held out my hand and looked at him. "Not until I get my stuff out, then you get your key," he replied. I tried to argue, but he continued to refuse and used his large stature to his advantage, knowing I'd have no chance in a physical altercation. He turned and walked away, heading back towards his workplace. Jin and I talked a little more before she handed me my hummingbird necklace and left. I stood there alone, staring at nothing, trying to wrap my head around what just transpired, and then I cried. Oh, I cried. With nowhere else to turn, I had only one call to make, to my mum. The moment she answered, I unleashed this deluge of words at her that were half sobs and half rant. "Stay right there, I'm coming," she said. God bless my mother. Soon enough, both of my parents pull up in my dad's truck, and my mum gets out to comfort me and gives me hugs. I look at the driver's seat and see my father with his jaw clenched and a death grip on the steering wheel while staring straight ahead. Oh crap. They take me to the pawn shop and my parents write a check for more than $500 to get the TV out. We then drive straight over to Bob's workplace and return the TV to the manager. As the manager finishes up the cancellation paperwork, my dad spots Bob pacing around the back of the parking lot, frantically talking on the phone. Unfortunately, I didn't get to hear the ensuing conversation, but my dad returns within a few minutes holding my house key and looking victorious. "I believe this is yours," he says as he hands me the key, then pulls me into a hug, and I cried a little into his shoulder. My dad gave me a squeeze, kissed my temple and whispered into my ear, "They're firing him." I leaned back to look at my dad and he just smirked and said, "Now he's jobless and homeless." I thought about it for a second before I said in my most sarcastic tone, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that." We laughed about it a little, and my parents gave me some words of wisdom before leaving me to drive myself home, where my best friend was already waiting to keep me company. Bob and his sister showed up a few days later for his pitiful boxes of stuff. He tried to talk to me, to explain, but my best friend descended on him like a harpy if he muttered more than a few syllables in my direction, so he was shut down almost immediately. He left that night, and I have never heard from him since. I blocked him on social media, but there was really no need as he made no effort to contact me on any level. That's Bob. Ever lazy, ever deluded, and always an a-hole. So here I am, many years later, happily married to my high school sweetheart and the mother of 2 beautiful little boys, and grateful to have moved on when I did. The experience with Bob certainly took its toll. I lost a lot of weight due to lack of appetite, but had a myriad of trust issues moving forward. But the point is, I moved forward. I have grown leaps and bounds as a person since this experience, and I'm truly content with where my life is now. But every now and then, when I'm drifting off to sleep, I can't help but wonder, whatever happened to good old Bob? Is he out there somewhere, in the woods, with his stick and his wits as his only gear, waiting for a Martian government to make its move? Ah well, a girl can dream. Thank you so much for reading, and I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to message me with any questions or comments. One edit. Since this seems to be a minor point of contention, I'd like to better explain the mention of Netflix early on in the post. I realise by the way it's phrased, it may have given some of you the wrong impression. He was not streaming Netflix, as streaming wasn't much of a thing then. He would just have a revolving door of movies he'd chosen on disc, coming and going from the house. Beyond that, he busied himself playing PlayStation 2, being a bane on society and general douchebaggery. That woman either had the patience of a saint, or the guy was just incredibly handsome to be able to get away with such nonsense. I also love the dad swooping in to save the day and getting her keys back. I also wonder what happened to good old Bob. Hopefully he turned his life around, but probably not. Okay, so that's all for r/ProRevenge. I really hope you did enjoy it. As always, if you do want to see more content like this, then please do subscribe. My Twitter, Discord, and Patreon links are in the description, and any support is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!